Hi, friends. I'm Arlen Vernava. I'm a longtime IMNer. I am faculty and education team lead. I'm glad to um, invite you into this conversation around transition beyond the interim period. And there's a lot there, and um, no PowerPoint slides, no handouts. Um, some noodling, I think, my own noodling around this topic, and then when we are together in workshop, perhaps there is something about what I have said over the next 20 to 30 minutes that provokes something in a good way in you, and we can more deeply explore together. I'd like to read from the blurb because I can say it more clearly this way than not. Communities of faith and practitioners who serve them have long leaned into two frames. And this is my sense of it, of course. Those who lead during transition are, to quote the American Heritage Dictionary, are serving during an intermediate interval of time, end quote, and have also accepted that adaptive complex and intersectional work has primary and focused attention during transition and this dedicated intentional interim period. I think of this first frame that always involves adaptive and complex and intersectional work as strategic intentional interim period. So that's one frame. Here's the second frame. The second frame is that there is primary and focused attention to a custodial posture, a custodial interim posture. And that is a posture that provides support, and it manages, and it maintains, and it advances an overall and stable, healthy enterprise, healthy community of faith. Two postures or two frames. I think these are historically true. Now, of course, these are not terms that you use, and there's nuance within them. Every community of faith and its denominational affiliation here in the United States and in Canada and internationally overseas have other words for these categories, and more than two categories. But broadly speaking, these have kind of guided and formed both the choices that clergy make, and it's almost always been clergy who are in these settings, in congregations who are joined by clergy in these interim period settings. Either it is strategic, intentional time where there is much going on and much needs attention before the community is ready to search and call, to begin to look for their next settled leader, their next settled clergy. Or it is a community that is feeling confident and competent, that has a sense of its fullness and its good self, and it needs someone to simply, and it's not simple at all, but someone to join them and walk alongside of them to advance what is already at hand while they prepare their work to call their next settled leader, their next settled pastor. These have been, I think, historically true and are often still the desire of congregations and the conversations that judicatory leaders, that administrative leaders have with congregations and with clergy. What type of support do they need? Do they need someone who is strategic, intentional, with some deep expertise and many tools in their toolbox, expecting that there is adaptive and complex issues that need attention? Or is it a practitioner and a congregation that are best served by someone who is wise, experienced, caring, and who will simply hold them and walk alongside of them and help them advance what they already have well in hand, both in the present moment and as they anticipate their future. I was ordained in 1985. So that was certainly the normative frame in my theological education years, and in my early ministry as a locally ordained, at that point, locally ordained young adult before going off to graduate school. It was the experience that I had in my own home congregation, where there was the retirement of the minister who had been there for 30 years, 35 years. The person who came next was an interim person for a fairly short season, a year, I think, or a little bit more, who was then followed by a fairly young clergy, young in their vocational work. And they stayed for a reasonable amount of time, 5, 6 years, 7 years or so. They moved on. The next person who came after that settled person left, the next settled person was there, I think, for a decade or so, perhaps a little bit longer than that. Kind of a familiar story in some ways. Things were not crazy making in this congregation in my growing up years. There was a sense of generational loyalty that existed within the laity participants. The clergy who came expected to stay. They weren't looking to just be in place for a New York minute. They expected to move on. When their work and the congregation's work had concluded a long season of time, and that seemed to be the case. I think that's often still the expectation of many. Our lived reality has shifted in those 40 years, and we know that this is deeply true. And so this word, intersectionality, I don't name it because it is popular. I name it because I think it is normative now, which suggests that the transition in the interim period remains essential and ongoing. Transition beyond the interim period is also essential. And if it's essential, then it suggests to me that that both laity and clergy, whether they are called interim-time clergy or settled clergy, whether they are fully funded full-time 40 to 55 hours a week leaders, or 2/3 time or half time, and also not embedded interims necessarily during this interim period, but consultant to the community of faith during their interim time. However, these different configurations are emerging and finding a new kind of a new momentum and advance. I think it suggests that the persons who are practicing that is clergy and laity who are practicing, and the laity who are lay leaders within the communities of faith, it is becoming, I would suggest, essential that they become equipped. They become equipped spiritually, emotionally, and technically, better equipped to advance the work of their community of faith. There is a short, I think, a short arc of time, a short season between the equilibrium and balance and wholesome and kind of wholesome, life-giving abundance that is at hand at the end of a period of interim time. There's a short season where that is maintained, a short season. And is that season a year? Is that season 5 years? I don't know what it is in TikTok time. My sense is that in chronological time, it's really, really very short. It's short, I think, for many reasons. I think it's short because because communities of faith are less and less peopled by persons who value generational loyalty to this community of faith over 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. They will join and give 100% of themselves for a brief period of time, and then they will move on. And I think that then means that when they enter a place, they expect to have impact. They expect to make a difference right away. Perhaps, again, that's always been the desire and the wish. But we know that organizations like our brains are accustomed to knowing what they know and practicing what they do best. And so whenever there is something new in the system or something new in our life, our immediate response, our reflexive, organic response, is to take a pause and say, maybe not. It's not that we're not open to the new and the different. It's that we are built to simply stay cautious, to make sure that the new and the different are not going to harm or diminish. And because that is so, a new person comes into the community of faith, and it takes them a while to find their level. It takes the community, the spirit of the place, a while to say, yes, this person is safe. And so that sense of generational loyalty had its own organic rhythm. And after a while, new persons were no longer considered worrisome in any way. They were part of this community now. So, of course, they were effective and appreciated leaders. In this day and age, with generational values and experiences having shifted, that arc of knowing, of entering the system is shorter and briefer than ever, both for the laity participant, for instance, and also, I think, for the clergy participant, who often doesn't view themselves as staying for 10 or 20 or 30 years, but rather for an effective season, because they have some sense of a vocational identity, perhaps, which is different than the vocational identities of those that nurtured me, and certainly slightly different from my own vocational identity. Although, of course, those of us who are strategic intentional interims are I think, our own little vocational exciting slice of the overall pie, and not the common and usual group. At any rate, but I digress to say that this sense of intersectionality, which the American Heritage Dictionary says is a framework for understanding how multiple categories of identity, such as gender, class, race, and vocation, and I would add political affiliation and religious and secular affiliation, both past and now present, and its practice, intersect in ways that create complex systems. And in this case, intersectionality, the definition says, it doesn't just intersect in ways that create complex systems, but that create complex systems of oppression and power, and the subsequent action and outcomes as a result of that. Perhaps, friends, we are in a moment in the life of communities of faith, in the practitioners, the clergy that serve them, and the trained laity that serve them. Perhaps we are at a moment where this sense of intersectionality as multiple categories of identity are in a dynamic and complex dance. They are that communities of faith every season look at each other, and the Spirit says, so who are we really? And what's really going on? And what are our core commitments? And are the core commitments that we had a year ago, even a year ago, are they still relevant and true for us? And are we agreeing on how it is that we actually live out our faith and practice it as a whole community? Do we have a sense of what the boundaries are for that? And who has a seat at the table, right? Who is a participant and an equal stakeholder, or not? And all of this flux, this warp and woof, this creating a new tapestry, I think therefore means that transition is happening constantly now. Not the I want to say, not the kind of normative and expected transition that happens when there is energy and flow in a system, and there is a shared sense of core values and commitments and identity, overall identity, and purpose is clear. And because that's true and new things emerge, there is transition that pushes us forward, that advances everyone's work, and which creates across its own synergistic energy, which is creates polarities and push and pull. All that's normative and life-giving. I think I'm naming as you're experiencing it, in whatever place you find yourself in the community of faith, as a judicatory leader, as a local clergy, as laity who are part of these communities of faith, and in whatever denominational affiliation, religious practice that is yours, that this kind of transition today is the kind of transition that feels as if common values, commitments, and identity remain very elusive and therefore conflictual, oppressive, and power grabbing. And if this is the case, then perhaps let's educate. I mean by that, let's find ways to equip both laity and every clergy. Let's find ways of creating grace space for those with some expertise as consultants for transitional work to enter the system and to walk alongside. Let's create an expectation that says the life of the community coalesces around shared identity and shared core values and shared purpose for only as long as those are truly life-giving. And therefore, we are always interrogating them, always re-examining them, always iterating with them, always accepting that the season is only this long now. It's not generationally long any longer. In terms, again, of local contextual core values, local and contextual purpose, local and contextual commitments. Our faith communities, by whatever flavor we are, certainly stand on certain fundamental core values and commitments. But those are generally not in question in quite the same way. It is, in fact, the ways in which they get interpreted in the local context by persons who bring their whole identity into the mix, where those identities are sometimes and often nowadays in stark polarity with other persons in that community, all of them saying in the most generic sense, we all follow the way of, or we all believe in, or we all share this, and yet the being and the doing of it is full of dynamic tension and inner conflict, if not outward-facing conflict. So transition beyond the interim period, perhaps it's always been with us. I'd say it is here to stay in a way that has emerged powerfully and differently in the last 10 or 15 years. So friends, let's explore this more deeply when we see each other, and soon. Until then, peace.